Hello, my name is Joanne. I am an alcoholic.
Hey, Joanne.
I'll get out of the way and let God take over in a few minutes. And my sobriety date is October 1st, 1996. And since that day, I've not had any desire at all to take a drink. I feel like I'm speaking to some friends, with some friends. Several people here that I know that I feel very close to and that have guided me for a number of years in this program. But it has been a wonderful program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It still is and will remain to be, but it is a part of my life that saved my life. I was spiraling on a hill downward. I was born in a small town called Wadesboro from here, and as growing up, my father was an alcoholic. My mother was a member of society, a working lady with a career with the government, and it was a lot of things that were different. I was held back from having children come over after school because of the way my dad would behave, and then I couldn't go out in the yard sometimes because of something, maybe what would the neighbors think, and it was a lot of things going on about what the neighbors would say. So his disease was kept under control, but I really can't say he was an alcoholic, but he was a heavy drinker. And Daddy would drink, and he would drink he would get happy and laugh, and then he would get sad and he would cry. So we never knew what mood he was going to be in, but he always ended up with a violent mood. It would be a lot of violence with my mother, and a lot of times I would be in bed as a child and she would be up pacing the floor and probably would make a candidate for Al-Anon at the time, and I would lay in bed and think, well, gee, Mom, if you just come to bed, everything would be okay. But she stayed up until Daddy stumbled home, and then there was a fight breaking out, and when they would get in the physical part of it, she would run in the room where I was sleeping. And it disturbed me, and at the age of 9 years old, my father was asked to leave our home because of the way he behaved. And there were a lot of times Mother would make him take me because that way she knew he would come back earlier. So I remember sitting in the car at bootlegger places. I remember sitting in the car when he was in VFW clubs. And I remember a lot of those happenings going on. And I also remember other women being involved with my father, but I didn't know a lot about it. I was a young child, but just something inside me, I knew things were wrong terribly. And I managed to do okay when Daddy left, but there were a lot of times my mother lashed out at me with the anger because she had this professional job and she was always with her church, and these people she couldn't tell her troubles to, but it was a lot of things through my school year, and I think that made me look into taking a drink. I don't know for sure what made me do it. I really can't blame anyone about it. But we, in Wadesboro, to have a good time, you either went to the Tasty Freeze or to a place called Bowman's. And what we would do is we would sit there and we would watch other cars ride around, and we would order a hamburger or order ice cream. It was a lot of curb service. You could blow your horn and the people would come out to the car and wait on you. And that was our entertainment in Wadesboro. But we would go over to Rockingham, a group of us girls, and we would roller skate and do other things like that and have a good time. And I remember roller skating a great deal. So that gave me an alibi when I started drinking. But I was 15 years old when some older girls pulled up beside Mother and asked, could I ride around? And she let me, and I was so excited about that. It was like a total adrenaline was going on. And after we got out of her sight, they turned around and handed me a little flask that had some alcohol in it. And that was my first drunk. I drank that and passed out. And I don't remember anything else, but I do remember waking up and there was a party. We were at someone's house that was having a party, and then we had to leave, and they got me sober and took me home and said they would come back on Saturday night. And so that started a series of going off with these older girls. And I started telling lies. Mother would be asking me where we went and what we did. And so I started telling her we were going roller skating. And so we started on later that summer vacation out of school, started going to a dance when it was like a band was playing and it was a dance going on. And then it was a dry county, so during the break of the band, you go out to the car. and people would be taking a drink and have some whiskey in the trunk and a chaser in the trunk. And I learned very early that you didn't have to know anybody when the band took a break, and you'd go out and you could just stand beside it. It was like a line of people just stand right there beside him, and this guy would talk a little bit, and it was his bottle, and he would take a swig and he would talk a little bit, and the next guy, he would pass it to him, and it would go on down the line, and I'd take a drink. And so I got some pretty good chugs of whiskey that way when I was a kid, and not knowing anyone. And then I remember one time I went out with a crowd of people, and they crawled in the car, and I crawled in the car with them too. And they turned around like, "Who are you?" And I was asked to leave the car. I remember that. I had to get out, and I said, "Shucks, that one didn't work that time." But we had a pretty good time doing that, so I was telling about my girlfriend Sherry, and Sherry's father worked for the government also, and she was a year older than I was, and she got her driver's license. And so we went back to this dance place, and these two boys had asked could they drive us home. And Sherry said, "Sure, but I want to drive your car." And so she drove the car. It was about 32 miles from our home. And when we pulled into Wadesboro, it was a police car sitting at the stop sign, and Sherry was putting on the brakes, and the car didn't stop. The brakes were worn out. So we hit the police car in the rear. And we pulled on over, and they got behind us and turned the light on us, and we pulled over, and it was on a hill, and the car rolled back and hit the front end of the police car. And I'm sitting there, oh no, my goodness. And they come up with the flashlights and shining in the car, and here she is driving, and I'm in the back seat with the other guy, and he said, "Well, I know you, and I know who your daddy is." And he said, "I know you, and I know who your parents are, your mother is." And so he told those boys to take us home, take me home first, and take her home. And I imagine they were waiting on the guys. We didn't know them, so we were pretty brave. Mother had always told me not to get in the car with people I didn't know, but we did. And it was pretty good. Nothing ever got said about it. No one got a ticket over that, and it scared Sherry and I pretty good too. So we didn't know, who was going to tell our parents. But her father was the postmaster at the time, and my mother worked for the federal government in agriculture. So we had to watch our P's and Q's a little bit, but we were two wild girls, and Sherry's mother knew it. She told my husband a couple years ago, she said, "Your daughter and your wife and my daughter lived it up when they were young," and all. But we graduated high school and went on our separate ways in Wadesboro, and I wanted to go to this college, and I started talking to my mother about going to this college when I was a junior in high school. She was telling me I couldn't do it because she didn't have a man in her life, that she wasn't married and didn't have a man, and if she had a man, it would be that she would have the money to do these things. And so I decided before I went out on my own, I was going to get me a man. So the second guy I dated had a job. The first guy I dated didn't. He was in high school. And so I proposed to him. And he married, and he took me up on it. So my girlfriend Sherry worked for what they call a justice of the peace back in those days, and they were the notary, and she typed up warrants and things, and he had this big notary seal on her desk. So no one really taught me how to tell lies, but I really learned how to tell lies to get my way. And so I wrote a consent form and signed my mother's name to it that I could get married, and she put that seal on it for me, and we got married on the night of the junior-senior prom because I already had the gown, So I said that would be a perfect time to do that. So we went down to South Carolina and got married. And so after we got married, I went home and he went home. But we finally told our parents about it, and so when I graduated, I went on up to Charlotte, and it didn't work out though. We tried with it, and when I got about 3 years after I got married, I decided I was ready to have a baby, and at the age of right before 20 years old, I had my first child. And during that time, he had already met someone else. And it was just one of those things. But I followed him to Georgia, and I met another guy in Georgia and got married there. And he was in the military, so I got to go to Europe. But before I went to Germany, we went to, I worked for the car dealership in Georgia where you do car titles, and I did a lot of car titles. In fact, I had to be investigated by the FBI, and the FBI went around, and my mother called me up, and she said, "The FBI is here investigating you. What have you done?" And I said, "I haven't done anything. That means I got the job with the state." And so I was going with General Motors, and I had gotten the car titles business because some of the cars in Georgia were not titled yet. And this has been a pretty good while back. And so we went to Atlanta to see the hippies. It was a lot of talk about the hippies. And so we put a carload of us ladies, and we went up to Atlanta to the Peachtree Street. We left on Friday after work, and there's all these shops, and there's all these long-haired and bearded people walking around. And I, being from Waynesboro, it didn't take much to get me excited anyway, just some bright lights. We could go around the bypass around Charlotte, and I could see all the city lights and get excited. And but we stopped and walked around, and we walked in these stores, and they were colorful stores. And some of the people I was with was up, and they were talking about different things in the showcase. And I didn't have a clue what was in there, but I know that the clothes and the leather things and all this was just really exciting to me. So we went back and we learned how to tie-dye. And all of us got together and we started tie-dyeing T-shirts and bedspreads and curtains. And so we were, we tie-dyed everything we could tie-dye. And so we got pretty good with it. And another girl and I got together and we started making love beads. And we were sitting there beading every chance we got. We made beads for everybody. Everybody had peace beads and love beads. And then another guy started making stash bags, and there was the leather and cutting it out. And everybody had those that knew each other. So we were in the style of things and had sash belts, and a lot of these things are coming back in style now. But I went over to Germany with my husband, who was in the military, and we were there 2.5 years. And the landlord put some German beer on the heater and heated it up. And he said, over here in Germany, we drink our beer hot. And so I had some of that Lowenbrauer hot beer the first night there, and it didn't settle in my stomach too good. But I managed to get pregnant that first night I got there. And so I had my first child that was born in Germany. My second child was born in Germany. I only had 2 little boys. And so we went around, and then I needed money, so I tie-dyed, and I took it to the head shop there, and they took it on consignment. And about 3 weeks later, I went back, and he said, "Your thing sold. They sold the first day." So I started tie-dyeing things and making beads and selling and putting them on consignment. So we went to a British rock festival over there. It was Germersheim, Germany. And the first band that played was Pink Floyd. And it was the second annual British Rock Festival in Germersheim, Germany. And I think when they were playing and shooting rockets over our head, about 7 ambulances went out. And I'm sitting there thinking, look, all these people are ODing on the music. And they said, oh no, that's not the way it is. And so, but it was great to me, and I was sitting there. But we really had a good life over there. And when we came back, I went back to work at Bill Beck Pontiac in Charlotte. And I came home and I needed a glass of wine when I got off work, because it was like go to work, go to daycare, come home and get the kids situated and start cooking dinner. And I worked under a pretty stressful job, because in North Carolina, doing car titles, you can't make an error and erase it. You have to be perfect on that, or then you have to type all these forms and say, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it that way, and get all these forms notarized. But it was a pretty stressful job with 2 young boys, and so I needed that glass of wine every night. And so my husband started calling me an alcoholic, and he said that his father went to AA, and I didn't know that. And he said that he started out drinking a glass of wine every day. So I started slipping and drinking my wine because it was causing so much trouble, and I was so frowned on, when I knew it was no harm in me having a glass of wine and relaxing, and I deserved it, and I thought I did. But little did I know what it went to. And then after that, his job transferred him, and we moved to Wilmington, and then we moved to Durham. And while we were in Durham, we had a whole new change of things happen. I wanted to go in business for myself. I had a car. My first husband had bought me a Corvette, and it was a 1962 Corvette, and it was right before the Stingrays. It was the old Corvette, and it had been sitting in this garage at my mother's house since I went to Germany, and these Chevrolet people saw it and they wanted to buy it back. So I got a good offer on that, so I sold my Corvette, and I had enough money to go in business for myself, I thought, until I started buying merchandise. But I wanted to have a fashion boutique. I wanted to sell the bell-bottom pants and the Nehru jackets and the bell-bottom sleeve shirts, and I just loved the fashions. So while I was in there and I was drinking food behind my counter, this man walked in and had a carton of Easy Wider cigarette papers. And he said, "You're in the wrong business." And he was this huge guy, and he said, I'm from Jaime from Yonkers, New York, and I am the world's largest manufacturer, importer, and distributor of smoking accessories. And he said, "And I'm here on the rice diet, and I want you to be my pet." And so he got on the phone, and he started ordering stuff, and on the phone, and he said, you don't have to pay for it till you sell it. And next thing I know, UPS was coming every day with boxes of stuff. And I started opening these things, and he was putting them in the showcase, and they were merchandise right pretty, but little did I know that at the time my fashion boutique had turned into a head shop. That head shop supported me well and comfortably for 17 years, but I had a head shop, so we named it The Joint. I mean, like, what else? So I'm sitting there. In fact, I remember this real cute girl came in, and she was asking me, did I have a carburetor? And I'm sitting there trying to figure out why this girl's coming in here asking me for a carburetor. You know, when that's something you need for your car, you know, it had that much sense, but I didn't know what a carburetor was. So I got educated by my customers, and I had some really good, loyal customers who educated me, and actually some stayed with me from the first day to the last day. When we closed our store in 1991 and moved to Wadesboro. But during that time, my husband and I just separated. He found an attraction with a younger woman, and of course I was 30, and I didn't forgive him. I probably should have, but I didn't forgive him, and so we ended up in a divorce. And during that time, I drank right heavy, and I would go out and party a lot on weekends, and I stopped doing things with my children that I was doing because on Sunday I deserved to sleep in. And my partying on weekends started partying like on Friday daytime, and then it started on Thursday night. I started partying, and then on Wednesday night I started partying, and it took. And then even on Sunday I started partying, and that was a pretty big family day. But not that I lost complete out of touch with my family, because my two children were the most important thing in the world to me. And I had hung around some pretty shady people. I had changed a lot of my friends, and I had friends who had to let me go because they would come over with their kids, and we would play Monopoly and we would drink. But they told me, they said, "Joanne, we're just going to have to let you go. I mean, you get too drunk." And they left, and along with that, they took their children, who were my children's friends. And I didn't realize the damage that was doing, but I remember later on, you know, when I look back at it, my youngest son had cried over his friend not being able to come back or not being able to come over and play, and it was because of my alcoholism and my drinking too much. And it's just that when I would start drinking with my friends, I would find myself drinking more than they did and drinking faster than they did. And it never occurred to me that was a sign of being an alcoholic, because I didn't know anything about alcoholism or going to AA meetings. But I managed not to go to any in the time of Durham. But a couple years later, I went to a party. I had a store in Raleigh and I had one in Durham and Chapel Hill. And this is what I did when things got to going really, really good. In the beginning, I always related to drinking as having money. So I didn't have liquor in my house until I started making a lot of money. And the camera people, I got to do a TV commercial. Some of the camera people was our customers, and they got me on Saturday Night Live. And in 1977, I did a TV commercial on Saturday Night Live, and it was aired for a long time, and I did the NFL playoffs. And it was pretty cool to walk around the mall and have people know that was you, talk to you, saw you on TV, and and so I started patting myself on the back that I'm doing a real good job. I never gave God any credit for this at all. So it was just all me. I was doing a really good job, and I stocked that little cabinet up over my sink with liquor as full as I could get it. And when people come over, like you would hear on TV, visitors would come over, "Can I fix you a drink?" It never occurred to me that maybe they were fixing them a glass of tea. I always immediately assumed they were fixing them a drink of alcohol. So I started inviting people to, "Can I fix you a drink?" But not too many people wanted to drink the time of day they dropped by to visit me for this and that. But I would drink it myself at night. I met my husband at a party from the guy in Raleigh had invited me to come to a party, and so I called a friend of mine and I said, "Come on, let's go to the party. The kids have gone to bed early. They played hard." And so when I walked in the room, and there's this biker, and I hadn't had a biker yet, so I was looking at him. And he had long hair and a beard, and he's standing there with this leather jacket and this beer in his hand, and he was, that's it, grown. And so he was telling me about this Harley Davidson that he had, and I said, "Well, I want to go see your motorcycle." So he gave my car keys, and he was 6'6" tall, and the guy that I called up was about my height. And so he said, "Here are the car keys, and you can just take Joanne's car home. She's going with me." And so Mike said, "Okay," and took off. And so I went over to see his motorcycle, and it was a bunch of parts all over the floor. And so he said, "I thought you had a Harley. I wanted to see your motorcycle." And so he eventually did put it together, but it was just pieces. I mean, all over the floor. It was in his living room and his dining room, and that's all it was. And I said, "This is in your house, your home, and oil and stuff," and it was awful. So we went back to Durham, and I went and got my car and went home. And so we started dating the very next weekend. But what touched me about this guy is he was taking his father for chemo every weekend, and it was a kindness about him in his eyes that I got to thinking. I said, wow, if I had a member of my family that was sick like that, needed chemotherapy, I don't think I could hold up to take them to that. And then about 6 months later, his father passed away. And the next year, my son, my two children were the main thing in my life. And my youngest son, lymph nodes got swollen real bad. And he got really, really sick. And I took him to the doctors and emergency rooms, and his pediatric doctor, and they said, "Well, give him Robitussin, take him on home." And about 3 months later, they discovered that he had a rare form of leukemia. He was the third one in the entire nation that had the form of leukemia he had. There was one on the East Coast, there was one in Japan, and then there was my son. And there was no survival on this form of leukemia. So the chemo and the things that they tried on him was pretty harsh. And something came over me that I had never expected to happen, but I found myself not wanting to go home. I found myself not wanting to be around him because I didn't know what to do. And in fact, as a mother, I had always been able to kiss it and make it better, or to go and to change something that had happened in my children's lives and fix things. But this I couldn't fix. It was bigger than me. And I found myself abandoning my child and leaving him with his older brother, who was 13 at the time, and Andy was 9. And I found myself not wanting to go home. I became a workaholic. I would work late, And when right before bedtime would go, I would go home, and I found myself not wanting, because when he went to the hospital and they told us that he didn't die, he quit playing sports at the time too, because they were really in baseball and real active in sports, and I just didn't know what to do, and I became more of an alcoholic at the time, drinking, and there were times at the hospital the doctors asked me to stay with him because there were parents who would leave their children when they found out their children were going to die. And he lived 18 months, and the night that he was passing away was not much different than another night that after we had been there for a couple of weeks. And I had people bring me things at the hospital, and I would get intoxicated, and I stayed with him. I didn't leave, but I was high when I was there. And I was walking up down the hallways one night, and the guy I was dating is my husband today, and we were dating, and we were, and I was high, and I was a little bit more messed up. You've gotten where you're drunk and you're drinking, and you just wish you weren't quite that drunk right then at that moment. But he came out of the room and told me, he said, "Andy's doctors are still here." And it was on up in the morning, and he said, "They're here because he's going to pass away." And I wish at that moment right there, it just come over me that I needed to go in and speak. My mother and father were there, and all the doctors that cared for him were standing in the room, and I knew my voice was going to slur. And I just didn't know what to do, so I walked in the room anyway. And during that hospital stay, and during every hospital stay, I would pray and pray and pray that they would find a cure and my son would get well. And I walked in the room, and I kind of looked at the window, and it was like, "God, if you're going to take him now." And I looked at my son, and his heart beat 4 more times, and it stopped. And I lost my youngest son at the age right before his 11th birthday. And I managed okay. I was at home, and everybody had gone back to work, and it was I wasn't managing at all. I just had said that, but I had gotten very angry at God. I'd gotten mad at God, and I started cursing God and telling God to stop looking at me, stop taking those, take those 2 bright eyes off me that I could feel, that I thought guided me everywhere I went, that I thought I could turn all my heartaches to and all my burdens to, and that God failed me. And I was angry at God, and I didn't acknowledge God for 12 years, and I think that must be the 12 years I had my son, but I didn't acknowledge God at all. And I just drank and drank and drank, and I drank myself to where I couldn't manage the business. I drank myself out of irresponsibility, and my husband and I were he was a drunk husband, I was a drunk wife, and he was disgusting to me, and I was disgusting to him, and we argued and quarreled, and so I just left the business. We were fighting in the business, in the stores in front of customers, and we didn't care. And we were just letting each other have it. So I walked out of this business and gave it to him, and went and just stayed at home, and I just wallowed in my pity and started drinking more. And we had a car. We had not paid the rent one time and had to leave the building. And because we were just partying with all the money, and the car didn't have insurance on it, so it got towed. And we had just paid for this car. It was an '86 Monte Carlo Super Sport, and I couldn't get sober enough to go and get that car out. I mean, it was like I was drinking every day, and I said, "I'll go get it tomorrow." I knew I could not get sober enough to go get my car, which we probably could have sold it and paid our way out of some other problems we were in, but that never occurred to me. What occurred to me is I can't go get it. They won't give it to me. Just smell my breath. They could smell me. And the drinking just kept on. The arguing kept on. And I ended up in a homeless shelter. I went from a business owner for 17 years to driving a new car every 2 years to owning a home to the homeless shelter. And while I was in there, we knew that what was going to happen, and so my husband left for a while, and I went back to Waitsboro, and that's how I got to this part of the country. And it didn't stop my drinking. Just for a couple of weeks I stopped, but when I found out, my son had told me about a bar named Ambet's, So I started going down there, so I talked them into hiring me as a bartender. And I had never tended bar before, but I knew I could drink all the beer. When the man turned his back, I could guzzle down. And so I bartended there for a little while, and ended up getting a DUI. And so I went out of town to visit some friends of mine and got another DUI. I hadn't even been to court for the first one yet. So the judge told me I had to go to mental health assessment and get to go to the classes. And I did. I went to the mental health assessment, and they told me I needed to go to 10 AA meetings and get the signatures signed. And so I did that, but I didn't start going to many meetings because I was working at night, and I got off work at 9 o'clock at night. So one of the old timers in Wadesboro, who I love dearly, is passed now, started opening the meeting just for me on Friday night, and started having a meeting there so I could make a meeting. And it was a really good, meaningful meeting. That's where I picked up my first white chip, and that's where I asked the first lady to sponsor me, and she told me no. And it was only one lady there, and so that just about killed me, and that started making me think, oh, I'm dirt, I'm trash, and this, just really bad thoughts about myself, low self-esteem already. And so I went on to a couple more meetings, and then I stopped going to meetings, and of course you know what happens when you stop going. And they kept saying, well, read the big book, read the big book. And I would pick up the big book and try to read it. I'd read a page and I'd fall asleep, and it was boring to me. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't really get into the big book, and I would just get so sleepy, trying to read that. So I started going around to some book studies, and they had to drive. Dick Bright had some book studies, and there were some other women in the meeting, and they would not sponsor me. And 10 years later, now no one told me this till 10 years, that not any of the women that were in there had worked the steps, and that's why they couldn't sponsor me. But they're all gone now, and I finally asked this older lady, Miss Lib, who I didn't think would sponsor me, and she gracefully said yes, she would. And so when I did my steps, I hemmed and hawed. I didn't think these steps were for me. I mean, I couldn't make a sense out of what working these steps, why it would change my life. Do you know it took me 5 years to work all 12 steps and to work them the way that I was supposed to work them. We had a ladies' meeting one night, and so my lady sponsor, she's passed now, Barbara, was talking to another girl about Liz Claiborne, and I couldn't nowhere afford to buy Liz Claiborne, and so they weren't really having much of a women's meeting. So I kind of blurred out a little bit about what I thought was a fifth step. And I went for the shock treatment too, and I got their attention a little bit, but it was just stuff that was on the surface. It wasn't the stuff down inside that was really causing me some problems. And I had no idea about working that through a fourth step the way that I was supposed to work it. I had to go down into my childhood, and I had to humble myself like a child. And it brought back things that I had remembered, because it was tough to be humble, because I remembered then that I was an abused child, and it brought all these things that I had blocked out of my mind out, and it made it hard to admit powerlessness, because I was vulnerable, and when I was powerless, I was hurt. But it also gave me strength. I could definitely see the unmanageability in my life and what was going on. I mean, I was in my 40s, and I had all these things I had worked really hard to achieve, but yet I was home living in my parents' house now. And that's the sign right there of some unmanageability, but thank goodness I had a kind, loving mother who did take us in and allow us to drink and do what it took to do in order for us to hit our bottom the way that we had to hit it, unfortunately. But going into Alcoholics Anonymous again, I had to believe in God, and that's something I didn't want to do. When I came in and I heard people talk about God, well, I had heard that at home. Everybody says, well, give it to God. And my family, aunts, uncles, grandparents would say things like that to me, and it would turn me off, and I felt like just getting up, walking out the door of AA. But it was, I kept seeing this change in my husband. Now this, where the men had taken him and loved him and worked with him on the steps and sponsored him the way AA does. And I saw a change occurring in his life. And so this was years later, and so I wanted that change. I wanted what I saw you have, and that stayed with the program, and I couldn't find it. I mean, a newcomer could come in and get more AA under their belt than I could, because I was just not thinking the steps were for me. And so I humbled myself and I started working the steps, and so I started realizing that I had to go back into my childhood. I had to hash something that I had put in the closet and buried. I had to pull it out, and I knew that when I did that, it was going to make me a little bit emotional. I was going to go through changes, and I did, but the changes only lasted about a day or two, and I felt the changes, and I did a 4th step on that. And when I had an opportunity to do my 5th step, I had to go out of town because it involved some people that were in Waitsboro that was known people. And so I did that, and then I came back and I did my 6th step. And I did my 7th step, and it said to become willing, you know, and I thought maybe the other times I had been hearing it, it was like to do it perfectly. And this says just to become willing. You know, so I became willing, and as I did things, the load I was carrying got lighter and lighter because I became willing to unload these things. And when I did step 9, I know it was like, I can't do this because it's going to hurt me. Well, you know, when you start making your amends, there's nothing in there about it hurting you. It's about it's hurting other people, you know, or someone like that. So I had to regroup on that, and I had a couple of remarks made. I made an amends to a cousin that I stole some money out of his piggy bank when we were kids, and it was a 5 and a 2 ones. The paper, I stole all his paper money, and and then I knew I couldn't go anywhere to spend it because I didn't have any money, so I rolled it up in paper and I left it in the door with the lady that took care of me while my mom worked. And so she had found it, and of course it was known he was missing a 5 and 2 ones, and so it was, she took it back to him, and they, I had to know I did it, but I always lied about it, said no, I didn't do it, you know, I'd have never seen it, you know, so I watched telling those little lies for a while, and so I made amends to him about that, and he said, well, that's not all you owe me. You owe me a whole lot more, but it's just my cousin's problem, not mine. And so I have to realize that. I did what I was supposed to do in AA, was to make that list of amends and going to make the amends. And then I made amends also, and then people said, well, you didn't hurt my feelings, you know, I didn't even pay it any attention, you know, but here it had eaten at me, and I knew I had wronged someone, so I did make the amends. And not only that, we had to clear up the wreckage of our past because we had owed people, and then especially the Internal Revenue Service was on us, and they had told me that my home in Hillsboro would satisfy their tax lien, and they had a tax lien on that. So I didn't want to lose my home because of what we owed in tax, and so we started clearing up the wreckage of our past. And for 7 years, we started putting our money in the shoebox, and because the bank wouldn't even let us open a bank account. I mean, we had messed up our credit line and everything pretty good, so we had to earn ourselves, and we had to clean up that wreckage and make restitution for harms done. And these things are so important, and I never would have learned it had I not thought, well, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm going to have to work the steps. I mean, I surrendered. I'm just not getting the program, and I worked the steps. And it's just something magical about them. And because of that, the spirit I got, the spiritual growth that I've had from the time that I asked God to help me. You know, I was trying every means that I could not to desire to drink, and so when he did, it was sometime in August or September, and I always had a problem October 1st, and that was the day Andy died on. And so I waited, and I made that my sobriety date, because that date was always going to be with me, and it was always going to haunt me, but I was going to turn that around. And so that's my date of sobriety. And have I gone over? Okay, but it's been amazing, and people were saying, well, you need to get into service work, do some service work. This was after I had started, after I'd done the steps, and people said, I really see growth in you, in the program, and I love the program, and I love the step studies, and I love the workshops, but I didn't love Vic being gone. He was into service work, and he was gone a good amount of time. And being in the program also, I can see how hard it is for the spouse not to be in the program or not to be in Al-Anon, to see how the other spouse is going and getting better. And I suppose that must be the part where you call it a selfish program, because you have to do what you need to do to get well with this. And I was so glad. So I finally surrendered to be alternate GSR. And so I was alternate GSR, and then our GSR left, and so I was alternate DCM. Our DCM left, and I got to be DCM. But when I went into my first meeting, it caught me on fire. It just is something, wow, this is more exciting than just going to a home group. It's exciting to be part of the district, to hear other GSRs talk about what's going on in their home groups, and it was just really good to know that, to be a part of that structure, that part of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I wanted to be a door greeter. I went to one state convention, and somebody shook my hand and welcomed me to the state convention. And I said, well, how did you get to do this? I want to do that too. And they said, well, just ask the chairman. And there he is over there. His name's Wallace. So I didn't know Wallace, so I went over there, and he said, sure, honey, you can do that, and put me at a door, and I door greeted for 2 years at state conventions, and I was just the happiest thing in the world doing that, welcoming people, because it was just such a big thing for me to go and see. The big book was mounted on the wall, like they put up at Midwinter, and they had the grapevine was there, and so it was just a great thing. And so that led to me being asked to be secretary. And then from secretary, I was alternate chairman, and then I got to chair the state convention for 2009 and 2010 year. And I wanted to stay in general service, so I got voted in to be the area treasurer. And I got to be treasurer for 2 years, and it was just real exciting. And I'd already given up, and I put in my resume for CPCPI, but it was like midnight, so I crawled into bed, and then the phone rang, and I got to be CPCPI. And this has been just the best position. It has been really great to go out and you meet professionals, and you go out to groups, and you do workshops, and you talk to people about how you can take pamphlets in doctors' offices, and how you can go and take pamphlets in health departments, and how you can share with doctors that alcoholism is an illness, it's not a choice. And a lot of people, still condemning people who are drinking too much, thinking, well, they chose to do that. They made their own bed, they're going to lay in it. But it's not that case. It's a disease. It's a disease of the mind and of the body. And even doctors today, still some don't recognize it as being that, or just they probably have heard it before, but they really don't believe it. Because they told a friend of mine that they're well enough, they can have a glass of wine. We can't have a glass of wine. We're alcoholics. That's alcohol. And these things here keep me sober. I have sponsees, and I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I love this program. And thank you very much for having me come speak.